To this day, I still don't understand how you will see the baddest girl you've ever seen. I mean, drop dead gorgeous. The girl is stunning. And then you see her boyfriend, and he looks like a Monsters, Inc. character. How did you get over there, baby girl? Are you okay? How did he bag you? Are you okay? He's funny, isn't he? It's always the funny.
If you judge somebody for these things, then I think you're a bad person. First is acne. I think it's so weird to judge somebody for acne because I know this sounds dumb, but I genuinely don't notice acne on anyone else but myself. Like if one of my friends tell me, oh my God, I have such a bad breakout right now, genuinely, I don't notice it. So when I hear somebody judging somebody else for their acne, I'm like, why are you even paying attention to that? It's so unnoticeable. Acne is mostly hormonal based, so you can't control it. So why judge somebody? I think you're a bad person if you judge somebody for the size of their house. Yeah, and this is something that you don't really have control over, like, especially if you're in high school or something. You can't control what house you live in. And also, who cares? Like, who cares the size of your house? The only thing you need is a roof over your head. So if you have that, then you're good. So don't judge other people. Same honestly goes for like how clean or how messy somebody's house is. Like if somebody says, oh my God, have you seen what their house looks like? I don't know. I just don't think you can ever judge what somebody's going through. It's not harming you. So why judge them? I don't think you should ever judge somebody for the food they eat. But I don't like how it smells. Okay, then don't eat it. What? Some sense that I don't like, right? But I'm not gonna judge somebody else for liking it. We all have personal preferences. And honestly, if you think somebody's food smells weird, it's probably just because you've never tried it before. And if you tried it, you might actually like it. If you make fun of somebody's hobby, then I don't like you. Hobbies are literally just for fun. A person does a hobby because it makes them happy. So why would you judge somebody for their hobby and like take away that joy from them? If you judge somebody for how well they speak a second language, I'm actually gonna fight you. I think it's so impressive to know more than one language. Like I'm monolingual. If somebody's learned a new language, that is like really impressive. How are you gonna judge them for it? I've also noticed that the people that are like most judgmental about people's language speaking abilities seem to be the people that can only speak one language. Food for thought. Last, I do not think you should judge somebody for the amount of body hair they have. I just find it weird when people point this out because I never really notice people's body hair. I remember I was once in PE class and this girl points out, oh my God, did you see her? She didn't shave her thighs. I was like, why are you looking at that? Who cares? Literally, who cares? It's natural. It's not affecting you. Be kind to others. Don't judge them for things that are, kind of outside their control or for things that they love. Bye, guys.
I'm not going to make a 6-part rebuttal. I'm just going to say that I agree with this comment. Conrad's Valentine's Day failure was disappointing. And if we're talking about Conrad's Valentine's Day failure and Jeremiah's gutter butt proposal, one absolutely was worse than the other. Valentine's Day was worse by far. And to explain, I think what the disconnect is, because what Would Eli Pope do was talking about how we have a disconnect. He thinks the disconnect is that I am viewing Valentine's Day and the proposal on the same level, where she thinks Valentine's Day was just a cute little moment and the proposal was more significant. And I think the disconnect is that as the air sign she is, and maybe you too, I don't know if you're an air sign, but she's viewing these things, she is able to view these things in the air, in isolation, as if they fell out of a coconut tree. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just have a hard time looking at it that way. So the only way that I can see the proposal being worse than Valentine's Day is if out of context you said, okay, my situationship showed up on Valentine's Day with Twinkies and some cocoa and we looked at the stars and he surprised me. He ignored me all day but surprised me. Now to me that would still be absolute trash because Valentine's Day is important. It was important to Belly. And you can tell so obviously that she gaslit herself into being a not hearts and flowers girl. Like, okay, you loved it when Jeremiah did it. You were dreaming about him taking you to prom instead, but okay. To me, that's a big offense, but that's disappointing. But if you compare it to, yeah, my boyfriend proposed to me under the popcorn ceiling in our dorm room with a really small Walmart ring. Yeah, that in isolation is worse because a proposal is more significant than Valentine's Day, except context, Jeremiah was not a gutter butt boyfriend. He was not a low effort boyfriend. He was not a low effort friend, and he was never withholding with love, affection, or princess treatment with Belly. We all know that if we were allowed to have nice things, and We'll Always Have Summer had a different plot line, and Belly and Jeremiah got engaged at a different time under different circumstances, of course he would have pulled out all the stops and it wouldn't have been like this. This was a desperate moment for Jeremiah, and it was still ultimately about Belly. It was a tiny ring just for starters until I could afford to pay for it myself, not with my dad's money. Because why? She had just been on his neck about all lazy frat boys spending their parents' money, which again, I think is really stupid. They all should have been spending Adam's money. But he was trying to do what she wanted and impress her. And even though he got nervous, just did it in the dorm room, I don't think an extravagant proposal would have really been on brand or fit with what he was trying to do, which was prove that he was was mature and serious, but he still had great dialogue, forthcoming with the love and the intentions. I want only you. I don't ever want to be without you. You're the only girl for me. I've always known it. I'll never love another girl the way I love you. I'll try so hard. Like, very determined. And what was sweet about it is that this, even though it was in the dorm room and the popcorn ceiling, it made Belly so happy. And think about how much she loved him and the joy she felt in that moment. She couldn't even put it into words. Yes, it was gutter butt. I'm a veteran hater of We'll Always Have Summer, but this part of it was sweet. Valentine's Day, on the other hand, wasn't a desperate moment. It was an afterthought from a rich situationship who literally had a Tiffany necklace in his possession at this point, but couldn't be bothered to give it to her, say, I love you, say, I want you to be my girlfriend, but only to grab the Twinkies lying around in his dorm room. Back at a Swiss Miss, ignore the girl all day, make her think you don't even know it's Valentine's Day, and then show up unannounced and take her to her front lawn after treating her like trash the whole time, never even claiming her. And it irks me in my soul, deep in my soul, that he gets a single flower for this just because he actually showed up and didn't overtly insult her for once. He did ignore her all day, but just keeping those standards on the floor, just low, because he can, just because he can, just for the sake. That is why Valentine's Day will always be worse than the proposal, because this is just a demonstration in if you keep their standards low, you can continue to keep them low, and they will praise you for doing below the bare minimum. I will not be taking it back, and I will not be taking any L's. Thank you. To bring up the silly summer program again, but I just forgot for a second how deeply annoying the Team Conrad collective can be, and how they usually just block me or like delete my comment after they're presented with the receipts that the only thing they have on Jeremiah is not even that he cheated, because he did not. He had rebound segs after Belly destroyed his self-esteem and had been emotionally cheating and lying to him, and that is their big argument when Conrad literally put hands on Belly in the books. And I wasn't even talking about the fact that me and my bestie actually got heckled by Conrad stans in person at a musical event. That's not even what I was talking about, but I just want to remind you all that it's Virgo season. I will show you receipts about how Jeremiah didn't cheat. I will show you receipts about how Conrad doesn't actually apologize for all the things you think he apologized for. I will show you receipts about how Conrad and Belly were never friends, and how he literally belittled the college that he knew that she was excited about possibly attending. Therefore, A, either doesn't actually pay such close attention to her and what she says like you all say he does, or just doesn't care or respect her, or both. Don't try to correct me about my man, because it's not worth it. They really will talk so loud only to look stupid every time, and then just block me. Let me properly explain the tale of Arya and Ezra the criminal in the Pretty Little Liars books, because while he did not get put away in prison for an extended amount of time like he should have, at least in the books, he did get arrested, he did get caught, and he did get fired. And then later he was sort of like framed as the D-bag that he is, at least, and they certainly did not get married. I forgot how totally unhinged the books are, but I really do enjoy them. It starts out basically the same way as it does in the show. They meet in the bar, they're talking about Iceland, whatever, and then they start hooking up. First day of school comes, Arya sees Ezra, and he's like, holy blank, right? And then he makes up this weird excuse about a bee in his pants as to why he cursed or whatever. So then she goes and sees him in his office, and she's like, I won't tell if you won't. And he's like, no, I could get in a lot of trouble. You wouldn't want me to get in trouble. You shouldn't have lied about your age. And she's like, I didn't lie, you just assumed. And he's like, you shouldn't have implied it. We can't do this. I think you're amazing, but I could get in trouble, whatever. So Arya's all upset, but she starts like having a flirtationship with Noel Kahn, and in the books, Arya and Noel actually have this long-standing romantic relationship that like develops throughout the books, and honestly, like, they're a little bit cute. Anyway, Noel really likes Arya, and he flirts with her in class, and Arya kind of likes him too, but she's admittedly kind of just doing this to make Ezra jealous, and she kisses him, and Noel is like, come to my party, and Ezra, the grown man, the teacher, gets butthurt and starts kind of like bullying Noel in class. But then while Arya is at Noel Kahn's high school party, as she should be as a high school student, Ezra has the audacity to text her and is like, come over. So then she goes over to Ezra's apartment and they start hooking up, and they almost have sexual relations, but then they don't. And then Arya gets a text from A that's like, oh, that's some kind of extra credit. And so she leaves, but she actually leaves her phone at Ezra's apartment. And the whole thing with Allie comes to light, and it's very traumatic, chaotic, whatever. And she actually goes back to Ezra's apartment to retrieve her cell phone. And at this point, Ezra has read the text from A on Arya's phone, and he doesn't know what it is, and he thinks that Arya is like making fun of him, and he's like, extra credit, was I just a game to you? And she's like, no, you don't understand. And he's like telling her to leave, and then he puts his hand over this girl's mouth, and he's like, please leave. And so she bites down on his hand to the point where it bleeds, and he pulls away and his hand is bleeding. He's like, WTF, get out. And that's the last we hear of Ezra in the first book. Then for a while, Ezra's still working at the school. They kind of pretend like nothing has happened, but Arya starts dating Sean Ackard. Now this is where it gets a little confusing, because in the show, Sean was extremely irrelevant, and he only dated Hannah. Now, he does date Hannah first in the books, but then he also starts dating Arya. And then because of who he is as a person, while Arya is dating Sean, Ezra essentially takes advantage of her, confiding in him about her father's affair, starts talking about himself, and tries to make out with her. And they do for a second. She resists at first and is like, no, I'm with Sean. But then he's like, I can't stop thinking about you. And they start canoodling. And Sean actually ends up getting a text from Ed with pictures of Arya and Ezra hooking up. And so while Arya and Ezra are literally entangled at his apartment, the police literally like knock on the door and are like, you're under arrest. Come to find that Sean had ratted them out and is like, this is what you've been doing, right? So then he gets arrested. So then unfortunately they just let him go, and Arya obviously doesn't press charges, but he does get fired. And he's like, listen, Arya, I think you're amazing, but I'm gonna go to Rhode Island to do pottery or something. And that's basically the last we see of him until book 10, I think. And I really didn't like the books that much past book 8. I thought it just got a little convoluted, but basically what happens is Arya breaks up with Noel. She's all upset, so she starts writing to Ezra. Come to find this loser has written a novel about their relationship, and it's like really weird, but she's like so into him, and they're like making plans that they're gonna like run away together and live together or whatever. And then she finds out that he has been hooking up with this exchange student from Finland named Claudia, and then she actually ends up getting back together with Noel. So at least she didn't marry that man and adopt a baby with him.
So I'm very intentional about not talking about celebrity gossip on my page, and I haven't seen It Ends With Us. But I do want to talk about this a little bit because just today it came out that Justin Baldoni hired the crisis PR firm that represented Johnny Depp during the Amber Heard trial. And the way that this conversation has evolved on the internet has been really concerning to me. Because immediately when the controversy first came out, it was compared to Don't Worry Darling a lot. And we had about 5 seconds of people saying, what did Justin Baldoni do? Why did the entire cast unfollow him? Why are there no pictures with him? Why does it seem like the cast is avoiding even mentioning him in interviews before it got turned around to the woman involved is cringe and we don't like her and we all want to dogpile her? Now, listen, I am not blaming anyone for having opinions. Everyone has opinions about public figures. That's normal. And frankly, like the status in our society, like we have classism. When you see someone who's like one of the like most elite people in our society, and the way that they talk about themselves and the way they talk about other people can be very telling, and it's very personal. I totally understand people having feelings. I also understand that as someone who struggles with having like kind of a public image myself, and I'm kind of a socially awkward person, that it can be really hard to portray yourself genuinely. And there are some people who just have like a lot of charisma, even though they're not necessarily good people, and are really good at like being charming in these kinds of settings. And I feel for people who aren't naturally that way. I genuinely do, because it is hard. However, there are certainly plenty of celebrities, speaking in hypotheticals, that don't do themselves any favors, that say things that come off not good at all. And I don't blame people for having opinions about that. What I find interesting, and when I say interesting, I mean concerning, is how often our society like seems to find joy and thrill in actively tearing down women. The Don't Worry Darling controversy, whether or not, no matter what you feel about Olivia Wilde, was very much rooted in misogyny. It was very much about an older woman dating a younger, like, heartthrob that had a lot of young women fans. It was very much about the fact that Olivia Wilde was a mother and a wife, and people loved Jason Sudeikis, and about how, you know, she was a bad mother, she was a bad director, she was too infatuated with her new young lover to actually direct the movie, all of which were unsubstantiated claims. And we'll probably never know what actually happened on the set of Don't Worry Darling. I can't speak to the character of any of the people in that controversy or this one, because obviously I don't know them. But even when Spitgate happened, it's not like people were attacking Harry Styles' character. You know, it was like a joke. That's not the case most of the time with women in the public eye. And you could argue that the women that this specifically happens to don't paint themselves in a positive light necessarily usually, and you would probably be correct. But my point is, there are plenty of men. There are plenty of men in Hollywood who don't paint themselves in positive lights, who don't get dogpiled like this. And I don't know. I haven't wanted to talk about this issue because it is a very sensitive topic, and obviously I don't know more than anyone else knows. But it was just a very stark contrast to me to see the comparison to Don't Worry Darling and see how quickly this particular controversy spun onto, we don't like this woman. And I don't know, if I hypothetically were a man who had just directed a movie about domestic violence and rumors were swirling about something that happened behind the scenes, and I had just spent the entire press tour talking about what an important issue domestic violence was for me to champion and how serious it is, I think it would take something pretty major for me to hire a crisis PR firm that specializes in representing known abusers, because that's quite the look. But that's obviously just hypothetical. I don't know anything, and I certainly don't know these people. But yeah, I immediately clocked some weirdness around this, and I'm very curious to see how it unfolds, because it certainly seems like right now there's more to the story. But yeah, as soon as people start turning this into like a team thing, I'm team this person, I'm team that person, it feels like the reality of the situation goes out the window, and the potential seriousness of the situation is no longer relevant. And I think we could all do some societal investigation as to why we take up all the air in the room making fun of women when there are potentially more serious things to address. Okay, I'm just making one video to clarify a few things, because this is exactly why I don't like talking about this kind of stuff on my page. In addition to just not really enjoying taking part in like a lot of the excessively negative culture of like online discourse, I also just don't care that much, because I agree that a lot of these celebrities are probably just not good people, and they are definitely worthy of a ton of valid criticism. There is so much valid criticism being talked about the way this movie is marketing, and the way this movie is marketed, and the people involved. Like, there's a lot you can criticize Blake Lively for, or Colleen Hoover for that matter, who I was only familiar with like tangentially for a long time, knowing that people took issue with her work but not really knowing why. And I also understand why people like Justin Baldoni. He has said like a lot of really correct and good things on the press tour from this movie, which is in stark contrast of the rest of like the girly pop, like female empowerment, for some reason, rom-com marketing that makes absolutely no sense. I totally understand why people are upset about that. My issue is just that I wish I could find this video. There was a creator a couple of months ago who made a video about how our tendency in online spaces and in society as a whole is to lean towards the punitive, to punish people, to find a moral reason to disagree with someone and use that to justify our need to like punish people publicly. And how when your entire like philosophy is based on punishing people because they don't agree with you, that can very quickly go awry, because you're going to be agreeing with people who also think, hey, this person needs to be punished, until you're not, until they're going to start having different reasons why people should be punished. And it's a slippery slope. So my worldview is very much, I don't like the tendency that we have to punish, to feel like we need to put people through the ringer because they've done something that we don't agree with. And a lot of that is informed by the fact that I am an online creator, and like the, you know, call out culture on this app and this idea of like moral posturing, I think a lot of the times turns into a mob mentality instead of something actually productive. And that's one of my biggest issues with a lot of the criticism here, is it started out being about something very productive. It started out talking about how domestic violence should be at the forefront of this conversation, of the marketing of this movie, and it is not. And that is not only disappointing, but a huge slap in the face to survivors of domestic violence. And the seriousness of this issue is not being taken seriously. It's my understanding that that has been a longstanding criticism of Colleen Hoover's work, and this book in particular, which makes me inclined to think that it's probably like a bigger than Blake Lively issue. Like, this was probably a marketing decision that was decided like by studios and maybe Colleen Hoover. And I don't think that excuses the flippant way she's talked about this, or the like the very tone deaf way this has been handled on her press tours. And she is like the face of this movie, so I do think she has a pretty big responsibility in marketing it in a responsible and ethical way. But that being said, I think that a lot of that conversation was the springboard for using the veil of moral outrage to have fun and be snarky and be mean. You can argue whether or not it's justified. I really am not trying to be the defender of billionaire celebrities, but I just think that it's a pattern that is recognizable in the way that specifically women, people like to attack them. I mean, literally just this week, Joaquin Phoenix walked away from that Todd Haynes project and put an entire cast and crew out of work, and screwed over so many people in a very, very serious issue. And people are not having, but it's not a fun thing to talk about. There are abuse allegations and very prominent working directors that have very, very clearly outlined histories of problematic to outright abusive behavior, but it's not fun to talk about that. So that's the issue for me. All that being said, again, it's I don't really care to be involved in any of this. People ask me my opinion on the movie and the press tour and the shit show around it. I gave it. I think there's a lot of stuff we don't know. Maybe stuff will never come out. I don't know what there is left to uncover or what else is going to happen. I think that there are a ton of valid criticisms and long overdue criticisms of the people involved in the making of this movie. I don't like participating in celebrity gossip or criticism because I consider myself someone who talks about movies through a critical lens. I don't really like analyzing people in the same way. I do like talking about societal trends, but I don't really like getting into the specifics of, is this person a bad person? Because I don't think I'm qualified to determine whether someone is a bad person or justifying of whether, excessive hate towards anyone is justified. I sometimes have thoughts that are overarching, and that's all. I think that there's a lot of people who have very valid critiques. I think that there's a lot of people who are having fun taking part in something that is no longer about critiquing things earnestly, and both things can be true. So it's not a moral criticism of anybody. It's just more observations. So Todd Phillips has been doing a lot of press ahead of Joker 2, and in this recent interview with Variety, he talked about all the changes they made to the Harley Quinn character. This is a direct quote. He said, "The high voice, the accent, the gum chewing, and all that sort of sassy stuff that's in the comics, we stripped away." As a longtime fan of Harley Quinn as a character, I have a lot of thoughts on this, but reading between the lines, it really sounds like what he wanted to do was strip away the hyper-femininity that the character is really known for. Probably to make her more palatable. In the article, he says that this is an attempt to make her fit into the Gotham, their Gotham, that version of the Gotham, believably. But it sounds to me like they want to make this character more palatable to the audience of Joker 1, and you can interpret what the audience of the first Joker movie was all on your own. I'm not gonna do that for you. And I want to bring up Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy because I feel like a lot of fans of Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy on the internet now are maybe too young to remember that a lot of the discourse around those movies, like when they were coming out and immediately after their release, was that they were really good movies, but they weren't as good comic book adaptations because Christopher Nolan, the way he talked about them in the source material, seemed like he maybe thought that the medium he was working in was a little bit more elevated than comics, and he wanted it to be taken more seriously, and it was obviously more grounded. And so people kind of thought that he had like a bit of a resentment for the idea of like having to lower himself to make a comic book movie. Now, I don't want to comment on whether or not that is true or not. Obviously, I don't know. I think that there's some truth to the statement that he wanted his interpretation of Batman to be its own thing. But I also think that he really did do a lot of the characters a great service. I think that like particularly his Joker and his Harvey Dent are both really well-written characters that are very rooted in a kind of realism, but also very much embrace like the zany comic book aspect of what the source material was bringing to them. I feel like Todd Phillips is a much better person to have that critique of like, he seems hyper resentful of the source material. And like, he has said many times that like, this is a very different world. Even he's commented on Arthur Fleck, like not being a criminal mastermind. And it's because it's a different interpretation. And at this point, like we already know also that like this character isn't going to go by Harleen. Also, she's not a doctor. She's a patient. And I'm just wondering, like, what is even the point of making an adaptation that is basically its own original story at this point? I mean, I know why. It's because Hollywood is obsessed with IP and they want to get that sweet, sweet comic book fan money. But this, I'm just really confused. And frankly, like as a longtime fan, again, of Harley Quinn, like this character means so much to so many women. She really has become like one of DC's most popular female characters, which is kind of unheard of because she's not a hero and she's an anti-hero at best. And even though the character has evolved a lot in recent iterations to the more heroic side, she's a very complex character. And like, putting aside how silly it is to assume that having an accent makes you like less sympathetic or empathetic or believable, that's just absurd. People have accents. Also stripping away all of the hyper femininity that this character is known for sucks. And also, I mean, like, I was willing to go into this with an open mind, knowing that she has a different backstory, because I don't think that you have to have a one-to-one adaptation for it to be good, but a lot of what Harley is known for is the trauma she suffered and the way that she has overcome like a very, very difficult set of trials and tribulations that are very specific to women. Like, obviously, we don't even know yet if this film is going to incorporate the DV. That is one of the most defining aspects of Harley's relationship to Joker. Of course, I want to make it explicitly clear that issues like that don't only affect women. Of course, they can happen to men and non-binary people. They just disproportionately affect women all over the world. And I think that there are a lot of reasons, those among them, why this character means so much to so many women. I mean, there's also the fact that her character frequently faces misogyny in her quest to become a doctor and her career as a doctor. And even when she like has a criminal career, like she's not taken seriously because of her hyperfemininity. And I feel like removing all of that is like removing a lot of the reasons why this character has become the powerhouse that she has and has such a huge and devoted female audience. But I don't know, maybe I'm completely wrong and this is going to be great. Stranger things have happened, I guess. Anyways, I don't really recognize this character from the way they're depicting it. It's giving a little bit pick me. She can't be like other girls, but I guess we'll better part of the last 5 days trying to figure out exactly how I feel about Blink Twice, and I am still conflicted because this film tackles a lot of very serious subject matter and posits itself as like a feminist, like empowerment story. But I'm not entirely convinced that it gets there. I do unfortunately have to talk about spoilers in order to talk about like my thoughts on this film. So if you don't want to know any spoilers at all, I would scroll now. I do want to say right off the top that I do think this is an incredibly strong and interesting directorial debut for Zoe Kravitz, not only as a director, but as a writer. I think that the script is really interesting, introduces a lot of really interesting ideas and themes, and like also just assembling this cast. The cast is incredible. Like Gina Davis, Kyle MacLachlan, Christian Slater, like Haley Joel Osment. I love Alia Shawkat, not to mention how like transfixing Channing Tatum is here, and the lead Naomi Ackie is like just gives it an incredibly powerful performance. The script is also really funny and interesting, and I did feel some pacing issues. There were some moments where I felt like the story was dragging when I was supposed to be really interested in what was happening, but overall I think it is a very, very strong debut. That said, I think in a similar fashion to Don't Worry Darling, this script tackles some really intense and disturbing subject matter and spends a lot of the time that it could be focused on addressing the impact of those said disturbing moments on shock value and trying to make it like exciting and entertaining. And I get it's a movie, I get it's supposed to be entertaining, but I feel like for a film that is this explicit in what its messaging is supposed to be, I just don't think it lands in the way that it was intended to, at least with me. I just keep coming back to the ending and what it's even supposed to mean, because there are brief moments where we get this, like Adria Arjona's character has this speech where she talks about once she gets on the outside of the island again, how she wants to spend more time on female friendships because the world pits women against each other. And I don't know, it just doesn't feel like it hits very hard because we don't even have the proper context for their relationship, that none of these women actually knew each other, that none of them had pre-existing relationships to any of these people until that very end point, and like basically reaching the climax of the film. And then the lead character leaves her there to die, like in favor of saving someone who can enrich her own life, who she can control, but feels like is just participating in systems of power in order to benefit herself. Like, I genuinely don't even know what the message at the end of the film was supposed to be, because it doesn't feel like it's in an attempt to make anything better or challenge any of these systems. It feels like the narrative is suggesting that you should get yours in a world that is out to get you. I don't know. And honestly, that was kind of like a recurring theme for me. Like every time we got a glimpse of clarity about what these women's lives were actually like, I found that to be the most interesting moment and I wanted to know more, but we didn't get to know any more about them. We had to go back to watching them be zombies drinking margaritas in the sun all the time. And I don't know. It felt very unsatisfying to me in a lot of ways in trying to understand these characters and their motivations and their circumstances, because to make a film about the imbalance of power in our society and then not really delve in to the real world circumstances of any of the disenfranchised people in the story. Like, I get at the beginning we see that like they're struggling to make rent and they work as waiters, but it's like a flash in the pan moment, and then we don't actually see what the real impact of their lives would be. And also the benefits that are being offered to them by going to this island aren't monetary, aren't actually affecting their lives in any way. It's just like a free vacation. It's like getting away from the real world, which I understand is like a kind of fantasy in and of itself. But again, it just felt like playing with these themes in like the shallowest way possible, kind of. But as I said earlier, I do think there is a lot to enjoy with this film if you're able to stomach the intense subject matter and imagery. I just came away from it feeling like it was a little bit half-baked and a little bit unsatisfying and honestly a little bit contradictory in its own messaging. But that's just my opinion. I do think that when you're making films about this kind of subject matter, it's going to be polarizing. So I fully respect that there are going to be people who feel totally differently than me, but that's how I feel about this one. IP obsession is killing art. It just is. And as someone who has self-identified as a nerd since I was a kid, I've loved comic books and Star Wars and a million other franchise properties, like you name it. I am absolutely sick of this. I'm fed up. I don't want more. Variety tweeted yesterday in a tweet that I think is supposed to be shady to Deadpool and Wolverine that due to a sheer lack of compelling options, Deadpool and Wolverine is expected to top the box office in its 6th weekend of release. Now, like I said, I think they're trying to be shady to Deadpool and Wolverine, but I think this is inadvertently shady to all of the incredible original films that are in theaters right now that audiences just aren't seeing. And listen, I know this conversation is exhausting. I know that we've been having this conversation in one form or other over and over and over again for the past decade, but I think that's because it's important. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that's not me. I go and see movies all the time. I support original art. I'm an AMC A-lister. And you know what? I love that for you. I love you. You keep doing that. But most people are not. Because we're in a vicious cycle right now, and it is not just the studios that are to blame for this. Yes, the studios are to blame in a big way, based on the projects they greenlit, based on the projects that they throw advertising dollars behind. That absolutely matters, but it feels like we are fundamentally losing this curiosity and motivation from the audience to seek out things on their own without expressly being handed something on an advertising platter. And listen, I don't at all blame audiences for being excited about properties and characters that they already love. God knows I've done that a million times. And I'm also not limiting this to just like Marvel and Star Wars. I also think that the popularity of biopics is like hugely influenced by the fact that studios know that there is a pre-existing fan base for these public figures that they've all of a sudden decided to make movies about. But like as someone who loves Star Wars, I haven't watched like the last 3 Star Wars projects because it just feels so cynical to me. It has literally stripped the joy out of something that I love, that I grew up with. I don't want my kid to grow up watching whatever Disney Plus Star Wars show. I want to wait until he's old enough and introduce him to the original movies that are good. And that isn't to say that any of the projects aren't good or the creatives that they have working on them aren't talented. I love Andor. I'm still a fan of Leslie Headland, but like it just feels like such a blatant attempt to stretch this property, to spread it like butter as thin as possible into every nook and cranny of this universe, to squeeze every dollar out of it. And I hate that. I hate it. And I don't mean to sound so cynical. I like a lot of these things. I've been a defender of the MCU in general for a long time. I know that there are a lot of contributing factors. I do think that the streaming bubble is in the midst of bursting and the film industry is rapidly changing. And like the film industry hasn't really recovered from the strikes last year. Like a lot of people, production is way, way down. And I don't think that's just a result of the strikes. I think it's a result of the fact that it was never sustainable. What had happened, what was artificially inflated by streaming was never sustainable. And so I think there's going to be a lot of casualties from that. But I feel like every time there is a success story in the industry these days, it's something that I can just see is the wrong lessons are gonna be learned from it. And I feel like the success of like Deadpool and Wolverine is another prime example of that. Again, I don't blame audiences for liking it. A lot of recent movies that have come out that could be labeled as IP fodder or legacy franchise installment are movies that I really enjoy. But I feel like that's because we've moved backwards. Like David Fincher's first film was Alien 3. He wasn't able to make his passion project. He had to do like the franchise sequel. And now it's like you have to prove yourself and get an Oscar nomination and then you get handed the reins to a franchise, which like, that just doesn't make sense to me. Like we have some of our best young creative talent, instead of doing the projects that they would be making a name for themselves with, that they could be making their own legacy with, doing these legacy sequels. And then in the meantime, we have Dee Dee and Sing Sing and Strange Darling originals in theaters that just aren't getting the attention they deserve. And it sucks. I don't know what's going to happen. I know there's always going to be artists. I know there are always going to be people who appreciate real artistry, but film as an art form is relatively new in the grand scheme of things. It's only about 100 years old. And ever since it first began, it's been getting closer and closer to just being fully integrated with like capitalist entertainment as opposed to like art. And the past few years have just felt really bleak. And even when some of my favorite movies are essentially legacy sequels and IP, the lines are becoming blurred in a way that it freaks me out. And it would be one thing if we were still getting tons of successful original content alongside of like amazing legacy sequels like Blade Runner 2049 is an example of genuinely one of my favorite movies. but it feels like we're getting less and less all the time. I don't know. There are a lot of factors. I just saw a great video today about the music industry, about how like algorithms have curated our taste to be increasingly more hegemonic, and like we all have to agree of what is good and what is bad, and there's been far less like eclectic outliers in terms of like the kind of art that we consume, because we're all just driven to the same thing by the forces that are just in our lives constantly, technology and capitalism. And I don't know what the solution is, but I don't love it. I don't love the patterns that I'm seeing. And I don't know, go see some original movies, please. I'm just gonna rip the Band-Aid off. I didn't like Beetlejuice, and I'm kind of sad about it. I know that I have a reputation a little bit on the set for having like a small one-sided beef with Tim Burton, and I see where you're coming from. It's not entirely untrue, but I love his older work so much. One of the reasons why I have such strong feelings about Tim Burton's modern filmography is because his older filmography was so impactful and important to me. Like, yes, I love the original Beetlejuice. I love Edward Scissorhands, Sleepy Hollow, Big Fish. I love Pee-wee's Big Adventure, you know? Like, there's so much there that I truly love, and I've never been able to reconcile, like, the very blatant changes in his later work. And unfortunately, Beetlejuice falls into the latter camp of quality, in my opinion. And here's the thing, a lot of Tim Burton's later works have been popular. I'm sure a lot of people are gonna have fun with this movie, and there's a lot that I appreciate about it, like the commitment to practical effects. Some of the visuals and the gags were genuinely fun. The cast is also amazing, both returning and new, even though in my opinion there's way too many of them. There's way too much and too many people and too many B-plots and side characters shoehorned into this movie that just take valuable time away from the emotional storytelling element that I think is really important and integral to a lot of Tim Burton's earlier works. Like, one of the reasons why I like the original Beetlejuice so much is because Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis's characters are very obviously like very realistic, grounded, newly dead people that are just like normal humans that are adjusting to the weird world of the undead, or the dead, I guess. And in this movie, Jenna Ortega's character kind of has that role, but she's in the movie shockingly little. And I do think that her subplot in the film has the most potential, is the most interesting. And I would have liked to see a movie that focused around her as a central focal character and explored that story in more depth, and also her relationship with her mother and her grandmother, because that's the other thing. We get real caricatures of who these characters are supposed to be. I don't really understand how Lydia Dietz ended up here based on who she was, but also they did one of the things I hate the most, which she has the exact same styling as she did when she was 14 as when she's 50. And I get keeping the aesthetic, but down to the exact same hairdo, I just think is very like cartoon character energy, which I don't love. Catherine O'Hara also wonderful in this, but it feels like it was giving more Moira Rose than a tribute to the actual character she played in the original Beetlejuice, which I understand, capitalizing on what's popular. Everybody seemed to be having a good time in this movie, which is great. Even the characters, like Willem Dafoe's wonderful and Monica Bellucci's wonderful, but I don't know why they were thrown into this, honestly, because it just felt like it was taking up time. Like, this film has a really weird relationship with grief. There's a lot of grief written into the story, into the text, but none of it is portrayed in any kind of meaningful or actually like emotionally honest way. It's all played for laughs. There are huge character beats and things that happen that are essentially a quick scene, and then it's never addressed again, certainly not with any kind of emotional weight behind it. Ultimately, it just feels to me like this film came off as much more in the fan servicey nostalgia bait department than the meaningful tribute and trying to genuinely meaningfully add to a legacy kind of situation. So it didn't work for me, but I am genuinely thrilled for the people who are going to love it. And this cast is amazing, and I could listen to Winona Ryder and Jenna Ortega talk about their deep and passionate love of movies all day long, and Catherine O'Hara just being wonderful, and Michael Keaton having a blast. Like, everyone in this cast is amazing. So, yeah, I wish I liked it more. This is the thing about Tim Burton's work that nobody seems to understand or talk about, and that's that he is not an original storyteller. That's just simply not what he does. He is not an auteur, and he has never written his own stories. Like, that's the thing I think that bothers me the most about Disney naming it Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas, is because in that instance, yes, he did write the original poem. He had the original concept. That is a story by credit. That is someone who's like, hey, what if this was the kind of story that we told? And you might come up with a few characters, but being a story writer and a script writer are very different skills. And I'm not saying that coming up with a cool and unique individual concept isn't hard or like isn't a skill, but it takes a lot of skill to be able to translate an idea like what if a hitman fell in love is like a story by credit idea. Writing that script and having that script be successful and funny and well-paced and interesting and engaging is, in my opinion, usually significantly harder. And Tim Burton has never written any of his own scripts. Like, Edward Scissorhands was written by Caroline Thompson. A lot of his best scripts were written by Caroline Thompson, and she was also not treated super well by the industry, again, in my opinion, because she is to credit for a lot of Tim Burton's success. Same as you mentioned with, like, I think a great score absolutely elevates any movie, and Danny Elfman has been Tim Burton's, like, saving grace for a very long time. And I say this as somebody who, again, is a big fan of Tim Burton's early work, and being a talented director, even if you didn't write the script, is a talent all in and of itself. But I feel like people have this idea of Tim Burton being this, like, oh, he's just like a creepy cool guy. He didn't even write the script for Beetlejuice. He didn't write the original script. He didn't come up with the original character, and he didn't write the script for the sequel. Like, that's the thing. A lot of this stuff is not his own creation. Like, Frankenweenie is like truly his like singular thing that is his story, his concept that he wrote and directed. And I mean, like, he does have story by credits on like Edward Scissorhands and Nightmare Before Christmas, but I feel like he gets so much credit for having this like weird gothic mind, and it's like his visual adaptation of these scripts is highly significant, and he's a beautiful visual storyteller when he's operating at his best. But it's like a lens. It's like the lens that he is telling these stories through as a director. And again, like, a lot of great directors don't write their own stories. You don't have to be a writer in order to be an admirable director. But it bothers me. It bothers me because people talk about him like they talk about other auteurs like Tarantino. They think that his style is so indicative of his work because of the themes and the kinds of characters that are in his movies. But while he is a very distinct visual storyteller, he doesn't get credit for most of the story elements of his work because he's not a writer. And again, that's fine, but it's just this weird misconception.
Thing about the Princess Diaries, the book series. The first chapter of the first book of the Princess Diaries is literally just Mia going, my mom is having me keep a journal right now because she's decided to start banging my math teacher. And is that exactly what she says? Basically, but also no, because she's 14, so she's not saying banging, she's saying making out with tongue. But she's a 14-year-old girl who's failing Algebra 1. Her mom gets called in for a meeting with the math teacher, and immediately the math teacher is like, wow, would you want to go out sometime, maybe? And the mom says yes. And then, instead of asking her 14-year-old daughter, hey, would it be okay if I went on a date with your math teacher who's failing you and who holds you back after class, after school every day for an hour to tutor you, and who you see enough as it is because of that? Would it be okay if I went on a date with him? No, the mom doesn't ask. She just goes, hey, I'm gonna date your teacher. I'm gonna date your teacher, just so you know. Do you want to talk about it? And 14-year-old Mia Thermopolis is like, no, of course I don't want to talk about it. I'm really, really, really happy for you, Mom. This is great for you, Mom. And then she goes to her best friend and is like, my mom's doing this to me and it's the worst thing that anyone's ever done in the history of the world. And I'm so upset, which she is justified to be. And her best friend, Lily Moscovitz, goes, Lily says I have an overactive imagination and a pathological need to invent drama in my life. She says the fact that I'm so upset about my mom and Mr. G is a classic example. And then she has the audacity to say, if you're that upset about it, just tell your mom. Tell her you don't want her going out with him. I don't understand you, Mia. You're always going around lying about how you feel. Why don't you just assert yourself for a change? Your feelings have worth, you know? And Mia's looked at here as the bad guy. Mia even looks at herself as the bad guy for not discussing her feelings at 14 years old. But her feelings on this are literally, oh right, like I'm going to bum my mom out like that. She's so totally happy about this date. It's enough to make me want to throw up. So she's putting her mother's happiness above her own. And people are treating her like she's the bad guy for complaining about it to her only and also best friend. And it's just like, we see within the first 3 entries of Mia's diary, before she ever finds out that she's a princess, we see exactly how hard her life is. Because even when she thinks that the most popular guy in school is saying hi to her at the grocery store, her best friend Lily will tell her that that guy just had a quick brain synapse, whatever, and that he went temporarily insane, thought Mia was someone else, that he couldn't have thought it or known it was her. Otherwise, he never would have said hi to her because he had no interest in her and never, ever, ever would. Lily just... So, I hate Lily Moscovitz. I hate her so much. She's a terrible friend. The problem is, we've all had a Lily Moscovitz, and we've all especially had a Lily Moscovitz, I think, at the age of 14, where you think that people being mean to you is actually them being nice to you, and it's a really tough, confusing time. But anyways, welcome to the Princess Diaries chat, where every day, maybe, we'll see how long it lasts, I will be discussing the Princess Diaries. I even bought the really cute reprints that they sell in the kids section. It's adorable. They changed the font though. They changed the font. They changed the font and they thought no one would notice because they thought that this would only be something that little kids read, which was wrong of them, but they changed it. They changed the font, not of all of it, but of the lists. And in the next video, I will be discussing the lists, because I forgot how many lists they randomly bring into Princess Diaries for no reason. They're amazing. They're the best lists ever. I used to keep lists just because of the Princess Diaries. Okay, that's all. I have to go take a shower now. Bye. You know, in the Princess Diaries, the book, not the movie, Mia Thermopolis loses the friendship of Lily Moscovitz so super quickly when she starts like acting differently, and Lily gets mad at Mia for a variety of reasons, none of which makes sense because Lily is just a bad friend. But Mia then is completely alone at the school. No one knows anything about her. She doesn't have any friends. Lily has taken all the rest of their friends and kind of hopped to it, and Mia is alone and has a bodyguard, which is so weird and so annoying and so awkward for a 14-year-old girl to have, and no one understands her except for the one other girl in this entire school who has a bodyguard, and that's Tina Hakim Baba. And Tina Hakim Baba is one of the best characters of all time, especially that Meg Cabot has ever created. Meg Cabot does a really great job of writing girls and writing teenage girls and doing all of that. But Tina Hakim Baba is like better. She's better. Her father is supposed to be a sheikh. Her mother is a model. And she is a chubby girl who's very awkward and loves food and loves romance novels, and she doesn't have any friends because her father is convinced that she will be kidnapped. So he has hired for most of her life a bodyguard to watch over her and make sure she doesn't get kidnapped. Now Mia also has to understand what Tina Hakim Baba is going through because she also now has a bodyguard who is following her everywhere, and it's driving her nuts, even though her bodyguard Lars is the best, and we love Lars. He's great. And Mia goes one day and asks to sit with Tina Hakim Baba, and Tina is like, there's no one else here. Who did you want to sit with? And Mia's like, you, I wanted to sit with you. And Tina's like, yeah, you want to sit with me? With me? Are you sure? Are you sure? And Mia is not only sure, she is positive. And this is when she strikes up a friendship with Tina Hakim Baba, who is the most loyal person alive, okay? Not once in the entire series do Mia and Tina Hakim Baba have a falling out. Not once do they even have a misunderstanding. Tina Hakim Baba starts dating Boris, and Mia, who hates Boris with all her heart and soul, who couldn't stand Boris when Lily was dating him, let alone when someone else starts dating him, Mia is just like, okay, fine. Is she annoyed that one of her best friends is still somehow dating Boris and that Boris is still somehow in the group? Yes, but Boris is like the brother she never had. And then she does end up actually having a brother, which is funny now that I think about it. But Tina Hakeem Baba then chooses Boris. She doesn't want another man ever again. Meanwhile, Lily had cheated on Boris in front of him. In front of him. With a random busboy who was better than Boris because he struggled. And Lily wanted to know what struggle was. Lily's terrible and awful and I can't stand her. But anyways, so Tina and Boris start dating, and Tina and Boris keep dating basically until they're about to get married, at which point Tina becomes convinced that Boris has cheated on her because someone basically set Boris up to make it seem like he was cheating on her, and they have to work it out. But Tina is so it's already 3 minutes into this video and I really didn't get to say anything about Tina, but she is the girl who gets so excited for every single thing that happens to you. She is excited that anything that happens to you that is good happens. She doesn't get jealous of you. She doesn't get upset at you for having different emotions or having different plans. She is just happy to have you as a friend. And everyone should have a Tina Hakeem Baba because she is Mia Thermopoulos's number one top supporter no matter what. I love her so much. I'm gonna do more videos on her. Like, the last Princess Diaries video I posted was actually from last year at this time, when I was doing a reread, but now I might actually do another reread. That might happen. Okay, bye.